He hadn't been aware he'd felt wrong until he suddenly felt right again. James S.A. Corey, Leviathan Wakes. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review. I'm your host, Jacob Shymanski, with Ramya Amuthan. Rams, today we're doing 3 solo reviews. So I didn't read your book and you didn't read my books. I'm doing 2 reviews. You're going to do one. I'll start, you go, and then I'll do my third one. Sound like a plan?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, no time to waste. I don't know how interested you're going to be in this one, but I know a lot of people were because this is a really popular book. I'm reviewing Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. That's actually a writing duo of Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank. So they work together in a really interesting way, which I'll get to a little bit later. But if you're not familiar with Leviathan Wakes, maybe you'll be more familiar with the series that it's part of, and that's The Expanse, which is a really popular sci-fi series that Amazon turned into a really popular TV show, which I haven't watched and don't plan on watching because this book is all I need. This thing kicks ass. So this is a hard science-leaning sci-fi story where humans haven't discovered aliens. There's an asterisk to that. But this is many hundreds of years in the future where humans have colonized tons of planets and moons and asteroids and comets across the solar system, but they haven't left the solar system. So humanity is still basically stuck with itself. There's no aliens in this, and it's just humans dealing with human conflicts. We just happen to be able to travel from planet to planet, albeit slowly, and it's all in a hard science package, meaning that there's no like magic, and like the leaps of logic that we take, like the technology that exists here is like reasonably plausible and makes a big effort to still follow like the laws of physics. And I'll get to that a little later because it plays a lot into like what makes this book enjoyable. And I want to start with the world building because this is one of the main selling points of this series. First of all, the humanity is kind of split into 3 sort of factions, which have their sub factions as well. But the biggest one is obviously Earth and the Moon, which has like 30 billion people. It's hugely overpopulated. Most of the people don't work. About 50% of the population doesn't work and lives on universal basic income. All the food that people eat, like most of it is like engineered food. So there's a strange mix of technology. Like there's a strange mix of the world is like significantly worse than it is now, but also a lot better in other ways because of technology. Like you can kind of see it as like technology is just stopping humanity from collapsing, and we're just like surviving, like calmly surviving. And it's really cool dynamic over there on Earth. And there's like, for example, there's like really advanced like medicinal advancements in medicine and like robot doctors and stuff like that. But we have like no real solution for like high production of food. And then there's like Mars, which has only a couple billion people, but everybody works and everybody is working on terraforming the planet to make it breathable and have a breathable atmosphere. And it's like it's this very militaristic, very focused society, and they kind of despise what Earth has become. And so there's kind of a push and pull of 2 very different outlooks on what society should be between Earth and Mars.
So is Mars still the new planet?
Mars is still the new planet. Yeah, they've been colonized for a couple hundred years, but Earth is still very much like the center of humanity throughout the solar system because it has water in most of the manufacturing, and also just like the technology.
But as in reality, we're disappointed with the trajectory that Earth has taken.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
And then finally, the most interesting part of the world building to me is the Belters, or the OPA, the Outer Planets Association Alliance, which is basically everybody else. So there's like moons on Saturn and Uranus and the moons of Jupiter and all the comets that fly around the solar system. There are people that live there, and those places are kind of seen as like the frontier, where people just kind of escaped Martian and Earth societies to go and make it out there on their own. Life there is weird because people who live on these comets they live like on the inside of the comet, and they manage to make these comets spin, and so the centrifugal force pushes everyone to like the outer wall, and you basically cling to like the inside of it. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like so you basically have people living inside these comets,
That
and
is a strange twist. Okay. The
so
thing is, like, I didn't feel the magic in the world building
it's not
until
magic.
this part. Yeah, I know it's not magic, but it didn't feel, like, very far-fetched, when you explained Earth and Mars and everything else, and now I'm just like, "Oh, okay." Now
Well, there's
it's,
also
like,
the thing
far
is the
away.
world building leads into a lot of the conflict. Like, for example, like because things like messages across the solar system take ages to like travel through space, like even at
Right.
light speed, it would take like sometimes hours to receive a message. That's something that we're never going to overcome. Things like protein are incredibly difficult for humans to come by. So a lot of people in societies grow to be like really frail. The people who grow up on Mars, like born and raised on Mars and the belt and these comets, they grow up in low gravity, meaning they grow taller and like a little bit weaker to the point where people
Yeah.
on Earth see them as like they're not even humans anymore. And so there's kind of like racism there.
Mm.
Um, on Earth, people there are big restrictions on having children because it's super overpopulated. So you end up in these arrangements where like one kid will have like 12 official parents
Oh.
like all together. And so it leads to these like really funny like these really funny situations. So the
Mhm.
world building always and reinforces the plot. And in this book, the real plot has to do with a mega corporation discovering that Saturn's moon Phoebe is actually a uh, kind of like an old alien virus that they call the protomolecule, which is kind of like a cross between a virus and an engineered machine that repurposes like biological material to build things, and it's unclear what its goals are, and it also defies the laws of physics. And so if you get in contact with it, it'll just like consume your body and turn you into whatever it deems
Right.
necessary. And it's really unclear what it wants, why it's there, but it's been there for ages, and then this corporation discovers it and starts experimenting on it. And while they've discovered this, some samples have escaped, and now it's kind of made clear that any of these factions can utilize it as a weapon. And now there's kind of this standoff of like, what faction is going to be utilizing it to,
Mm.
control the others. And so, like,
That's the political
th-
aspect.
that's the political aspect, and there's a lot of diplomacy involved in this story as well. So I loved the hell out of this book because of the world building. It does a lot of heavy lifting. Like the combat is really sick. Again, because it considers all the physics involved. Like if you're accelerating super fast, like you're gonna get pressed back into your seat at like 10 G's, and like there's a good
Mhm.
chance you're gonna pass out. Gravity in ships changes all the time depending on how it's rotating, the acceleration and stuff like that. If I have any complaints about the book, it's that while the world building is excellent, there's very little work done for the characters, at least in the first book. The main characters are Holden and Miller, which end up
I
being on the
just
same
realized, like,
ship
you did not mention any characters this
because
entire
they're not
time.
worth mentioning. The characters are all secondary characters
This
because
could
the world
easily
is
have just
number
been, like, a
one.
premise without characters, it's just the
Basically,
idea of the world. No real human
I've
story.
never seen a book where the world building does as much heavy lifting,
Yeah,
and
that's
I don't
interesting.
really care,
Hmm.
honestly. And this is something that if you're a person who prefers character driven books, then this is absolutely not for you. If you're a fan of Andy Weir and The Martian and Project Hail Mary, you would be a huge fan of this because it's a lot
Okay.
of uh, hard science and science problem solving with more complexities and politics and that type of thing.
Hmm. It does sound interesting. I do feel like it's kind of a like an AI prompt. It's like, what would it be like if we were, X amount of years from now living in this circumstance, as humans, with the development having gone in this direction, that kind of a thing. But it definitely didn't feel like a human story, if you will. as you were describing it. So
It's worth mentioning that the plot is nicely fast-paced.
yeah.
And
Okay.
it's fast-paced and tight. Like, there's still a plot here that involves a lot of deciding who to trust and like trying to handle the molecule. But again, characters are kind of secondary, and
Mhm.
even the work that's done there is so shallow. But I personally don't really care. One of those
Okay.
weird books where I can acknowledge it's very lacking in one regard, but the world building
But so
lives up to it.
intriguing.
It's so
Right.
intriguing.
Right. It does sound intriguing.
That's my review of Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. That's the first book of the Expanse series. I'm giving it a solid 7 out of 10.
7 out of 10. Decent. Okay. So my solo review, because you didn't read this one, is The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell with Bill Moyers. Both of them are equally important in this book, but it is really an interview. Joseph Campbell is being interviewed by Bill Moyers, and it's written exactly like that. You're getting the series of interviews. And first, I'll tell you about what the premise of the book is, and then we can explore the style, because the style is just as interesting to me as the contents of the book.
Huh.
So essentially, this is a book that's broken up into 6 chapters, and it explores the mythology that shapes us. Mythology being the broad strokes, the concept of mythology being important in the human experience, which mythology is like a storytelling, right? So, um, the style, like I said, it's in-depth interviews of Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell is a scholar, and he is being interviewed by journalist Bill Moyers. And basically, they delve into the universal themes, symbols, and archetypes found in myths. And this is across cultures, religions, geography, history, every kind of way that they could explore mythology, they do. And we're talking about ancient legends, how myths come up in like everyday, let's say, tribes in Eastern Africa, to, humongous ways that myth is being passed through the Bible and other religious texts being followed by religions like popular slash mass religions. And Star Wars comes up a lot as well, because they're both huge fans of Star Wars. So they do a lot of parallel, the two of them, between just like real life and Star Wars, here Christianity and Star Wars, Hinduism and Buddhism and Star Wars, which was really interesting as well, and just kind of fun as a thread throughout. So Campbell, who's this like huge philosopher, he's got just absolute experience. He's traveled the world. He's met humans of every kind. Um, Everyday people. He's lived amongst Buddhists and monks, and he's went to like the locales of India, where he's explored like all the different sects of Hinduism. He's just been through it. He's an absolute philosopher, like modern day philosopher, if you ask me. And he argues that myths are not just old stories, but vital living guides that help individuals navigate everything from love to death, purpose, identity, all kinds of things. And they cover a whole lot, like I said, the importance of rituals they get into, symbolisms of gods and goddesses, which I think was my most the most interesting part of the book for me, was the exploration of goddesses and how that the mythology around goddesses have changed over the years, over the centuries. The loss of myth in modern life. Like, do we even care about stories and myth anymore? Do
Do
we
we?
follow? Yeah, do we? I don't
Does it
know.
say it's a problem? What does he
It's a
say?
problem. Campbell argues that um, rituals are some of the deepest ways that we connect to spirituality, and the deepest
Hmm.
ways that we connect to each other through spirituality. But we're losing that. We're losing the soul of spirituality because we just don't care anymore, or it's much more surface. It's not as deep. And we can't get to the essence of spirituality without understanding through symbolism, through myth. And he says we're losing that in modern day because of, ritualistic things and other reasons. Now, the big thing is this book was released in 1988, and then it was released as a PBS series, um, which are basically, you just see the sections of the interviews between Campbell and Moyers, and it was released in 6 chapters. So they had just like these hours long conversations for several nights, I guess evenings in a row, and it was like Joseph Campbell is, I think it was just a few months before he actually died. So this was very late in his life, a very seasoned philosopher at this point. Just everything he says is so meaningful or thoughtful, or he just references things from all cultures of everywhere that he's explored and been around. And his storytelling is just fantastic. Now, the style, like I said, 6 chapters. I'll tell you the names of the chapters because I thought they were
Okay.
kind of self-evident or like explanatory. Um, Myth in the Modern World, chapter 1. Chapter 2 is The Journey Inward. Number 3 is For Storytellers. 4, Sacrifice and Bliss. Love and the Goddess is chapter 5, my favorite chapter. And the last one is Masks of Eternity, where they kind of wrap it up into, why are we here? Why are we talking about all these things? Where does it land for us as individuals? I loved the audiobook. Okay. The audiobook essentially is a 6-chapter podcast. It's a 6-chapter limited series podcast. It's the full, like the interviews in their raw forms. And you hear both of their voices, the interviewer, the interviewee. Both of them are very smart. You can tell there's a lot of chemistry between them because this is something that they both very much enjoy and feel deeply about. I thought that Bill Moyers, is a very competent journalist because of his own interest, but also because of the way that he would ask questions and weave in different topics and stories and bring those out of Joseph Campbell. But I really just think that, first of all, this is a very well-known and popular book. I just read it now, but a lot of people know of this kind of things, especially if you're interested in this work or spirituality or getting to know religion. Because I think even if you're not necessarily interested in the spiritual growth part and the self-development part, there's so much knowledge you can gain from the comparisons of myth in different cultures and religions that are being explored throughout the book. It's fascinating.
What did you take away from it? Because you mentioned that this is a book that you can approach it in so many
Yeah.
different ways. What did you take away from it?
You know what I took away from it, Jacob, quite honestly, is that no matter who you are, and where you are, meaning geographically around the world today, or where you have been in the world during, let's say, the rise of Christianity or different versions of oppression, I feel like we all just go through the same thing. And we experience it and tell stories in different ways. Like the stories are different, right? Like men and women will take in stories differently depending on what rituals you grew up in, what kind of family dynamic you grew up in, or what religion was
Uh,
put upon you. But we're all kind of experiencing the same stuff. We're all part of like different Venn diagrams that overlap. And it's that is not shoved down your throat in this book, but that's the kind of realization you
there's
come to at the
something
end.
beautifully unifying about that.
Yes.
It,
Yeah.
if I'm understanding correctly,
Yeah.
Campbell is arguing that there's a universality to the myths and the values of those myths, regardless of where you are on the planet.
And you can find it. You can find it slowly. You can find it within your lifetime. You can find it
Wow.
by zooming out and, hearing what others are going through by just, scanning the world as it is. And that's kind of what they do in this book. I
Grams,
appreciated it.
give me a rating.
8.5 out of 5 out of 10.
Okay. Sometimes we do it
Mhm.
out of 5. Sometimes we just give a thumbs up or thumbs down. It's because
Yeah.
these ratings don't matter.
No, no, it's just us.
Just people like them.
Mhm.
Okay, I want to do one more book today.
Go.
Too Much and Never Enough by Mary Trump. You might recognize that last name. So Mary Trump is Donald Trump's niece, the daughter of Donald Trump's older brother, Freddie. Freddie was also known as Donald Jr. Fred Jr., sorry. She's also a clinical psychologist. And so this book is her memoir going through all her observations of growing up in the family and her perspective of Trump's rise to power while she uses her background in psychology to basically point out his experiences that he's had growing up in why they made him into the person that he is today. Because the weird thing about
Hmm.
being a president, somebody who's so much in the public eye, is that we all have like a psychological profile of all these presidents, right?
Of course.
You can probably do it. You
Can't help
yourself,
it.
a very detailed profile of like Justin Trudeau, our prime minister, maybe Justin Bieber.
And Justin Bieber as well.
um, so the book is told more or less chronologically, which is something I usually wouldn't like out of a memoir because I find it kind of lacks creativity and gets a little monotonous. And it does. Like, I will knock it a little bit for that. But this book has a bit of a car crash quality to it where it's really hard to put down. It's not particularly well written, to be honest.
Oh,
But it has a lot of fascinating revelations. Nothing shocking or unbelievable. But at this point, we will take any revelations about Trump because we like juicy gossip, and this book has that
what
gossipy
were the
quality.
revelations? Give us one.
Okay, how about we do it this way? I can just go through a list of crazy things I learned from this book.
Yeah, let's do it. Spoilers? Spoiler, I guess. Spoiler alert.
If you consider real life spoilers, because this is a memoir. All right. So one of the
For
things
those of you living under a rock,
this is the craziest thing to me. Fred Trump, Trump's dad, seemed to value the fact that Donald was a bully when he was younger, or as they call it, being a killer. He valued it so much that he brushed off the fact that Donald was incompetent, and
oh my,
Fred used Donald as a sort of like figurehead for their real estate business, but it was always in question to what extent Fred understood that Donald was incompetent. People thought that he totally knew and didn't care because like Donald had the right attitude and the right bravado, and other people thought he was like genuinely delusional about it and thought like that Fred basically bought Donald's Kool-Aid and thought like he really was this like marketing and a real estate genius. It's very unclear. But the saddest thing about the story of this family is the story of Freddie Trump, or Fred Jr. That's Donald's older brother. That was the firstborn son of the family. And these three, Fred Jr., and Donald, have a really strange relationship because Fred basically, at a certain point, just decided that Donald was the best son and always put so much pressure on Freddie to live up to the expectations of the family. And Donald lived up to what Fred wanted out of him. And what Fred wanted Donald to be was to be a killer. So what Mary asserts is that Donald kind of became a bully because Fred wanted him to be a bully. Freddie was not an aggressive person. He was much more soft-spoken.
But he was a puppet master? What am I getting here?
There's Fred Sr. and Fred Jr. Fred Jr. is Donald's older brother.
Yes.
The dad, Fred Sr., basically pushed Donald to be a bully, to be a killer in business. And Fred Jr. was just never able to do that himself. And it got to the point where he was just completely excluded from the family. They made fun of him behind his back. He became an airline pilot, which they thought was humiliating.
Oh my.
They called him a bus driver.
Oh, that's tough.
He was quite the alcoholic. He just like never lived up to it. They tried to basically exclude him from the inheritance. And remember that Mary Trump is Fred Jr.'s daughter. And so she would have been cut out from the inheritance as well. I'm going to touch on that a little later. The other thing that kind of blew my mind was she had a brief section about his casino business, which was wild, because they were never profitable. Like, it was never close because he used insanely high interest loans to get them up and running. And those loans were leveraged against the business, not himself, all while he personally collected a gigantic salary and a bunch of perks, like spending money and, a private jet and stuff like that. Those casinos went bankrupt 4 times until there was a big restructuring in 2004. But in that time, investors and bondholders and the employees got screwed over and over again, all the while he made profit. So Donald bankrupted these casinos 4 times, all while he made an insane amount of money and basically got away with it. And another thing that Mary Trump asserts is that Donald never felt any consequences for failing ever, because Fred Trump, his dad, constantly uplifted him. What's clear about the book is that Fred Trump, despite him being kind of a dick, he was a really good businessman and a really good work ethic and had a really good mind for business. And there's a reason why they have a fortune in the first place. Donald Trump is not that. Like, absolutely not. Now, okay, here's another thing that kind of blew my mind.
Mm-hmm.
When Donald won the election in 2016, the family was stunned because they know who he is. They were absolutely gobsmacked.
His biggest supporters.
No, when I say the family, I mean the extended family.
Yes.
The nuclear
People
family.
who's known him forever.
His other siblings, his little brother and his little sister, they revere him. His children revere him, but everybody else sees him for what he is. And Mary goes out of her way to, and this is one of the craziest things this book does, is to label Fred Trump, Fred Jr., as a high-functioning sociopath and Donald Trump as a clear-cut narcissist.
Oh my. You started with the point of psychoanalysis, and yeah, that's what it is, huh?
Now, the book is also icky in a couple ways because Mary Trump is very clearly biased.
Yeah, it sounds like a very heavy hard sell.
Yes, you need to take this book with a gigantic handful of salt, because remember how I said that she was part of this like inheritance battle earlier, and how her part of the family got like cut out? Well, they ended up losing. Like, she did get a cut, and that's a whole big story there. But they had many court battles over this, and she's very obviously spurned. So, like, there's a reason. By the way, this book came out in July 2020. That was just a few months before the 2020 election, which Donald ended up losing. So maybe this book contributed to that. So this is a hard book to rate, but I give it a 6 out of 10.
Really?
That's Too Much and Never Enough by Mary L. Trump. It's a very fun car crash that I have like ethical objections towards. Rams, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for reviewing these 3 books. Let's do it again. Let's do it again sometime soon.
Let's do it.
That was producer Ramya Amuthan reviewing 3 books. We'll make sure to put all the titles in the description, the video description, of the podcast description. That's all the time we have for today's episode of AMI Audiobook Review. The show airs at 1 p.m. Eastern on weekends on AMI Audio. It repeats every 6 hours as well. Remember, you can send us feedback at audiobookraview@ami.ca. We want to get to that. I'm Jacob Shymanski. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review. Thanks for listening.